On a cold, clear Thursday evening in the second week of September, 1962, in the wood stove heat of the Mapleton Grange Hall, 2.5 miles east of the Bragdon home place, 11 miles west of Presque Isle, Maine, and 19 miles from the New Brunswick border, a 31-year-old Portland produce heir named Sherwood Vail stood up in front of 40 Aroostook County seed potato farmers in a clean tan barn coat and a pressed white Oxford shirt, and told them, in the pleasant, reasonable voice of a man who has never once in his life had to be unpleasant to get what he wanted, that Vail Provision and Produce of Portland would be assuming the winter storage lease on the Mapleton potato house, effective the 1st of November. He said it kindly. That was the part the men in that hall remembered for the next 40 years. He said it kindly. The Mapleton potato house was a long, low, shingle-gray building, half buried in a bank on the north side of the Mapleton Road, built in 1919, with 11,000 square feet of frost-free storage under 3 feet of banked earth and sawdust. It belonged, on paper, to the estate of a Presque Isle lumber family that had not set foot in Aroostook County since 1948. The Aroostook Seed Potato Growers Cooperative Association had leased it continuously for 43 years at a rate that had been fair in 1919 and was, by 1962, laughable. 140 farms held their seed stock in that building through the northern Maine winter. Most of those farms were under 90 acres. Not one of them had frost-free storage of its own, because frost-free storage in Aroostook County cost more than most of those farms were worth. Sherwood Vail had gone to the estate's lawyers in Portland in July, and he had offered them 11 times the co-op's rent. He explained all of this to the men in the Grange Hall in about 4 minutes. Then he explained the part he had come up to say. He said that Vail Provision and Produce had no wish to be seen as hard men, that he understood the potato house was a matter of long standing in the community, that he was, personally, a sporting man. And so he made them an offer. 1 day of digging, sunrise to sunset. 1 man against 1 man, 1 machine against 1 machine, 1 field of equal ground split down the middle, the same seed variety, the same row length, the same soil, both halves graded and weighed by the co-op's own inspector at the end of the day. Barrels of merchantable U.S. No. 1 seed grade potatoes out of the ground and into the barrel. No culls counted, no bruised stock counted. If Sherwood Vail dug more barrels, the co-op signed the Mapleton potato house lease over to Vail Provision and Produce, quietly, without a fight, on the 1st of November. And if the co-op's man dug more barrels, Vail Provision and Produce would withdraw entirely from Aroostook County, not from the potato house, from the county, for 10 full years, in writing, and would pay the co-op's legal costs. He would bring, he said, his own machine, a brand-new 1962 Ford 4000 diesel row crop delivered to the Presque Isle dealer 11 days ago, with a new factory-built 2-row digger behind it, 44 horsepower at the drawbar. He said this last part, the men in the hall would later agree, with no particular emphasis at all, which was, in its own way, the most insulting thing he did all evening. The co-op's president, a careful 58-year-old Chapman farmer named Delbert Willett, asked for 1 hour. The 40 men in the Mapleton Grange Hall talked for 51 minutes. At 8:43 in the evening, they came back and said they would take the bet, and they named their man. They named a 69-year-old deacon of the Mapleton Union Church named Hollis Bragdon, who had been the co-op's unpaid volunteer grading inspector since 1938, who had never in his life owned a machine that anybody would have called new, and who had not said a single word for the entire 51 minutes. Sherwood Vail, who did not know Hollis Bragdon from Adam, smiled and shook his hand and said he looked forward to a good, clean day of work. What Sherwood Vail did not know, could not have known, standing in that Grange Hall in his pressed white Oxford shirt with his gold Hamilton wristwatch on his wrist, was that there was a notch filed into the left rear fender of Hollis Bragdon's 1938 Silver King. It was 1 degree off the vertical. Hollis Bragdon had filed it there himself, by hand, in the spring of 1957. The Bragdon home place sat on the Aroostook uplands, 2.5 miles west of Mapleton, on 110 acres of dark caribou loam, the deep, stone-free, slightly acid silt loam that runs in a band across northern Maine and grows the best seed potato in North America and grows very little else. Hollis Bragdon's grandfather, Ephraim, had come up from Kennebec County in 1871 and cleared it out of balsam spruce and hardwood with a yoke of oxen and a grub hoe. His father, Roland, had put the first potato house in the bank in 1908. Hollis had been born in the downstairs bedroom in 1893, had left school at 14, had gone to France with the 26th Yankee Division in 1918, had come home in 1919, and had not slept a night outside Aroostook County since. He had married a Fort Fairfield woman named Adelaide Sear in 1922. She had died in 1958. They had 3 children, the oldest, a son named Roland, after his grandfather was killed at Anzio in 1944. Hollis Bragdon had been the Aroostook Seed Potato Growers Cooperative Association's unpaid volunteer grading inspector since 1938, which meant that for 24 years, every autumn, he had walked the barrel line at the Mapleton Potato House and put his hand into a barrel of somebody else's seed stock and told them, plainly and without apology, whether it graded U.S. No. 1 or whether it did not. He had made a fair number of men angry doing it. He had never once been shown to be wrong. He had bought the Silver King in the spring of 1938, second-hand, from a dealer in Houlton for $290. It was a 1938 Fate Root Heath Silver King R66 built in Plymouth, Ohio, a small, light, fast, high-clearance row-crop tractor with a 4-cylinder Hercules 1XB engine and, remarkably for its year, rubber tires, silver paint, red wheels. It was not a big machine, and it had never pretended to be one. What it was quick. On rubber in 4th gear, a Silver King would do better than 25 miles an hour on the road, which in 1938 was an astonishing thing, and which had absolutely nothing whatever to do with digging potatoes. What mattered was the other thing. The Silver King was light. It was under 3,000 pounds. On the deep caribou loam of the Aroostook uplands, in a wet September, in the soft ground where a heavy machine sinks and packs and drags, a Silver King floated. Hollis Bragdon had spent 24 years turning that tractor into a potato digger. In 1946, he had built a 2-row digger and elevator behind it in his own shop out of a scrapped Hoover single row and a length of chain elevator off a burned-out Portland packing line. In 1951, he had hand-forged a 16-inch extension onto the chain elevator, which meant the potatoes rode 16 inches further and shed 16 inches more loam before they hit the barrel, which meant less dirt in the barrel. And, because the co-op's inspector weighed merchantable stock, not dirt, more actual potato per barrel. In 1955, he had bolted 48-pound cast-iron weights to each rear wheel, which was not for traction. It was for pitch. It held the digger blade at a constant depth over a rise. And in the spring of 1957, at the age of 64, after 19 years of digging that ground, Hollis Bragdon had taken a file and cut a notch into the top edge of the left rear fender of the Silver King, 1 degree off the vertical, at the exact angle at which, if a man sat square on the pan seat and sighted through that notch, his eye ran dead true down the potato row he was digging, and stayed true over the rise, and stayed true through the dip. He had cut it because he was getting old, and his neck hurt, and he could no longer turn and look back at the digger every 11 seconds, the way he had done for 19 years. What it actually did was let him dig a potato row without ever once looking back. The contest was set for Saturday, the 22nd of September, 1962. The first hard frost of the year was forecast by the Presque Isle radio station for the following Sunday week. The ground was a 40-acre field on the Chapman Road belonging to Delbert Ouellette, planted the previous May in Green Mountain seed stock, level, uniform, and split by a surveyor's chalk line down the exact middle. 20 acres east, 20 acres west. Both halves in identical rows of 1,240 feet. Sherwood Vail drew the east half. Hollis Bragdon drew the west. They would dig from sunrise, 5:58, to sunset, 6:09, which gave each man 12 hours and 11 minutes. There would be no lunch break unless a man wished to take one, and a man taking one was on his own time. Each man was permitted 2 loaders working the barrels behind him, no more, and the loaders could not touch the machine. At the end of the day, every barrel from both halves would be graded and weighed at the Mapleton Potato House by the Aroostook Seed Potato Growers Cooperative Association's grading inspector. The grading inspector was Hollis Bragdon. Sherwood Vail, when this was explained to him, laughed out loud and said that if a 69-year-old deacon of the Mapleton Union Church could not be trusted to grade his own contest honestly, then the state of Maine had no business calling itself a state at all. And in fairness to the man, he was completely sincere, and he never once for a moment reconsidered it, not that day and not for the rest of his life. He also brought a second grader, a Presque Isle Extension serviceman named Curtis LeBlanc, 38, from the University of Maine, and paid him out of his own pocket to shadow Hollis Bragdon barrel for barrel, not out of suspicion, out of thoroughness. At 5:40 on the morning of the 22nd of September, in a cold blue pre-dawn with the frost already standing white on the straw gold stubble at the field edge, 160 people were standing along the Chapman Road. They had come from Mapleton and Chapman and Presque Isle and Washburn and Caribou and Fort Fairfield and Easton and Westfield. There were 4 school buses parked on the shoulder because the Mapleton school superintendent had made a private decision that this was more educational than a Saturday at home, and the Aroostook County sheriff had come out personally to sit on the hood of his cruiser and watch. Sherwood Vail's brand-new 1962 Ford 4000 diesel came off a flatbed at 5:50 in the morning in factory gray and blue paint, with a new factory-built 2-row digger behind it, both of them so clean they threw the pre-dawn light back at the crowd. Hollis Bragdon drove the Silver King over from his own place 4.5 miles, on the road in the dark at 18 miles an hour, with a lantern hung on the drawbar because it did not have a working headlight. Sherwood Vail was, it should be said very clearly, an excellent tractor operator. He was not a fraud. He had been driving equipment on Vail Provision and Produce's own contract acreage in Cumberland County since he was 15. He knew what he was doing. And the 1962 Ford 4000 diesel was, by every honest measure that existed in 1962, a better machine than a 1938 Silver King in every single way but one. At 6:02 in the morning, 4 minutes after sunrise, Sherwood Vail was into his second row and Hollis Bragdon was into his first. By 7:30, Sherwood Vail was a full 3 rows ahead. By 9 o'clock, he was 5 rows ahead, and there were men along the Chapman Road who had begun, very quietly, to walk back to their trucks. And this is where the day turned, and the way it turned was so slow that most of the crowd did not see it happening at all. It turned on 3 things. The first thing was the loam. The 22nd of September, 1962, in Aroostook County, was a cold, clear morning after 11 days of rain, and the caribou loam on that field was, at 6 in the morning, soft. It was not wet. It was soft. Soft the way deep silt loam is soft, 3 inches down under a dry crust. The 1962 Ford 4000 diesel weighed, with the digger, something over 5,000 pounds. The 1938 Silver King, with the digger and the wheel weights, weighed something under 3,500. For the first 2 hours, that difference did not matter, because the Ford's extra weight and extra power simply pushed through it. By 9:30 in the morning, on his 6th pass, Sherwood Vail was driving the Ford across ground the Ford itself had already packed, and his digger blade, running at a depth set for the soft crust, was now running 2 inches high in packed ground, and it was cutting potatoes. Not many, perhaps 1 in 11. A cut potato is not merchantable. A cut potato does not grade U.S. number 1. A cut potato is a cull. He did not know. He could not know because he was watching the ground in front of him. The second thing was the elevator. Sherwood Vail's brand-new factory 2-row digger had a factory chain elevator of the standard length, and it did precisely what it had been built to do, which was to lift potatoes out of the ground and drop them into a barrel. Hollis Bragdon's digger had a chain elevator 16 inches longer than standard, hand-forged in 1951, and every potato that rode up that chain rode 16 inches further over the open chain, shedding loam the whole way. And by the time it dropped into the barrel, it was a clean potato. Sherwood Vail's barrels came off that field all day long with somewhere between 11 and 14 pounds of caribou loam in every barrel. The co-op's grading inspector weighed merchantable potato, not dirt. The third thing was the notch. Sherwood Vail turned in his seat and looked back at his digger, on average, and Curtis LeBlanc of the Extension Service, who was a thorough man and who timed it out of pure professional habit. Once every 14 seconds. 12 hours and 11 minutes, roughly 3,040 times over the day. Every single time he turned to look back, the Ford drifted. Not much. An inch, perhaps two, off the row center. And every inch off the row center is a potato under the shoulder of the blade instead of over the middle of it. Hollis Bragdon, sitting square on the plain steel pan seat of a 1938 Silver King with his chin up and his eyes forward, sighted down a hand-filed notch in the top edge of his left rear fender. A notch cut in 1957 at 1 degree off the vertical, at the exact angle at which a man's eye runs dead true down a potato row. And he never turned around. Not once. Not in 12 hours and 11 minutes. He held that row line dead true over the rise and dead true through the dip. His blade ran at a constant depth, held there by 96 pounds of 1955 cast iron. His potatoes came up whole and rode 16 extra inches of chain and dropped into the barrel clean. He dug slower than Sherwood Vail all day long, every hour of the day. He was never once ahead. At 6:09 in the evening, at sunset, Sherwood Vail had put 281 barrels on the east half of that field. Hollis Bragdon had put 222 barrels on the west half. Sherwood Vail had beaten him by 59 barrels, and the crowd on the Chapman Road knew it, and Sherwood Vail shut the Ford down and climbed off it and walked across the chalk line with his hand already out to shake, and there was nothing at all triumphant about it. The man was, whatever else he was, gracious. And then they took the barrels to the Mapleton potato house and graded them. The grading ran from 7:15 that evening until 20 past 2 in the morning. Hollis Bragdon stood at the barrel line in the Mapleton potato house under 4 hanging bulbs in the cold frost-free dark under 3 feet of banked earth, with Curtis LeBlanc of the Extension Service at his left shoulder and Delbert Ouellette at his right. And he graded 503 barrels of Green Mountain seed potato, 1 barrel at a time, with his own 2 hands. He graded his own barrels exactly the way he graded Sherwood Vail's. He pulled culls out of his own with the same flat, unhurried honesty he had been pulling culls out of other men's barrels for 24 years. He threw out 11 of his own barrels entirely. Curtis LeBlanc of the University of Maine Extension Service, who had been paid by Sherwood Vail to watch Hollis Bragdon and who had been watching him for 19 straight hours, later filed a written statement with the Aroostook Seed Potato Growers Cooperative Association. It ran 2 pages. The final sentence of it read, "I have never in my professional life watched a man work so hard to find fault with his own stock." The final grading, entered in the co-op's ledger at 2:20 in the morning on Sunday, the 23rd of September, 1962, in Delbert Ouellette's hand, read as follows. Sherwood Vail, east half. 281 barrels dug, cut, bruised, or otherwise non-merchantable stock, 84 barrels worth. Loam, soil, and foreign matter, 940 pounds. Merchantable U.S., number 1 seed grade potato, 197 barrels, net weight. Hollis Bragdon west half. 222 barrels dug, cut, bruised, or otherwise non-merchantable stock, 6 barrels worth. Loam, soil, and foreign matter, 71 pounds. Merchantable U.S., number 1 seed grade potato, 205 barrels, Net weight, 205 to 197. Hollis Bragdon had beaten a brand-new 1962 Ford 4000 diesel with a 24-year-old Silver King and a file-cut notch in a fender by 8 barrels in front of 160 people and 4 school buses and the Aroostook County Sheriff. Sherwood Vail did not contest it. He did not ask for a regrade. He did not call his lawyers in Portland. He stood in the Mapleton potato house at 2:20 in the morning in a barn coat that was no longer clean, and he read the ledger, and he read Curtis LeBlanc's 2-page statement, and he was quiet for a long moment. And then he asked Hollis Bragdon one question, which the 11 men still standing in that potato house at 2 in the morning all heard, and which is the only reason anybody knows he asked it. He said, "Mr. Bragdon, why didn't you ever look back?" And Hollis Bragdon, 69 years old, 19 straight hours on his feet, a man who had buried a wife and a son and had not slept a night outside Aroostook County since 1919, Shallow said, "Because I already knew where the row was, son. A man that has to keep checking never learned it in the first place." Vail Provision Produce of Portland formally withdrew from Aroostook County on the 11th of October, 1962, in writing for a term of 10 years, and paid the Aroostook Seed Potato Growers Cooperative Association's legal costs of $418. The Mapleton Potato House lease was renewed to the co-op on the 1st of November for a further 20 years. Sherwood Vail went home to Portland. He never returned to the potato business. He sold his share in Vail Provision Produce to his younger brother in 1964, went into commercial cold storage engineering, and made, by every account, considerably more money at it than he ever would have made shipping potatoes. But in 1971, Sherwood Vail wrote a check to the Aroostook Seed Potato Growers Cooperative Association for $11,000, unsolicited and with no conditions of any kind attached to it, to endow a fund for the maintenance of the Mapleton Potato House. He asked in the covering letter that it be named the Bragdon Fund. He asked that his own name not appear anywhere on it. And he closed the letter with one line, which the co-op secretary read aloud at the annual meeting in the Mapleton Grange Hall in January of 1972, and which is still read aloud at that meeting every January to this day. I have thought about that question and his answer to it for 9 years. I have never in my life been beaten so thoroughly or taught so much by a man who never once raised his voice to me. The difference between us was not the machine. The difference was the man. Hollis Bragdon graded the co-op's barrel line for 6 more autumns. He died at his own kitchen table in Mapleton on the 4th of March, 1969, at 75, with a cup of coffee cooling in front of him. The 1938 Silver King R66 is on permanent display in the Maine Potato Museum in Presque Isle in original condition. Chalked pewter silver, red wheels, the shop-built digger behind it, the 96 pounds of 1955 cast iron still bolted to the rear wheels. Museum visitors are permitted to walk right up to it. The single most photographed detail on that machine is not the engine and is not the digger. It is a small, plain, hand-filed notch in the top edge of the left rear fender. Hollis Bragdon is buried in the Mapleton Village Cemetery beside Adelaide, 400 yards from the potato house. His stone is plain Maine granite, and beneath his name and his dates there is one line which he chose himself in 1963 and wrote out on the back of a co-op grading slip and gave to his daughter. It reads, "He never had to look back." If this story stayed with you, there are more like it on this channel: forgotten machines, quiet people, and the work they did. Subscribe, and we'll tell you the next one.